Hello, I'm Rosemary Hannah. Welcome to the Bahamas Then and Now, a series that deals with our history, heritage, arts, and culture, and all those people who are concerned about guarding our heritage. Today we'll be talking about a special Bahamian hero. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Our guest today is Francis Fawkes, the firstborn of Sir Randol and Lady Jackie Fawkes. Welcome to the show, Francis.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. Francis, first of all, tell us who your parents were and about their upbringing.
My father, Sir Randol Fawkes, the founder of the labor movement, played a pivotal role in the determination of majority rule. He was born on the Fort Hill way back 1924. On the 20th of March. During that particular time, British colonialism was the order of the day, and the United Bahamian Party was the ruling party. People of color at that time experienced many severe restrictions socially and politically. My grandfather told him at that particular time that if you wanted to get ahead in life, with regards finances and education was necessary. And it was my grandfather, Edward Fawkes, that recommended law as a profession for him. And so he learned to read. After that, he was reading continually, and the quality of his reading material was very, very good. He read widely. He read books about great innovators, great thinkers, great artists. And he was always reading, so much so that my grandfather, Edward Fawkes, bought him some reading material from the auctioneer, and that kept him occupied. The reason that my grandfather wanted him to go into law was because he thought it was a way of making more money. But his motivation was really to rectify the social grievances at the time. During that particular time, I think it was 1942, and he was still a student, he witnessed the Burma Road riots, and he observed firsthand the grievances. And I think that was part in determining that he was going to go into law, take it seriously, and so he can do something about the situation that existed at that particular time.
Can you tell us something about, on a more personal level, about his Christian values and the influence that your grandmother had on your father?
Yes. He, by upbringing, was Orthodox Christian. And I remember that he read the Bible continually. And if you look at any of the Bibles that he read, it is full of markings, because he was always taking notes. His favorite books were the Psalms and the Proverbs. And I remember early in the morning, he used to wake us up and he said, let's read either the Psalms or the Proverbs. He, by nature, was a moralist, and he believed that the Ten Commandments were universal laws, so he stuck to them. And he believed that all civil laws should approximate biblical laws. And he often gave an illustration. He said, Francis, you really can't and you shouldn't go against the biblical laws, because the law of retribution will deal with you. And he lived it, and I saw in the house that he was highly principled, and both parents were highly principled. Yes. And so we really had a good example to follow.
Talking about that, tell us about what was he like as a husband and a father in the home?
He was very, very faithful to my mother. My mother is Lady Jacqueline Fawkes. She is an astute businesswoman in her own right and was also a past president of the YWCA. My mother told me that before marriage, he said that there will be no divorce. And I remember he never really took divorce cases. And so he stayed faithful to her and she stayed faithful to him, even throughout the vicissitudes of his political career. There was the sedition case, and that was stressful, but they remained together. There was the general strike, and there were lots of threats during the general strike, but they also remained together. And there were some other political upheavals, and they weathered them both together quite well.
That's wonderful. Tell us a little bit more about your mother and her role, and the role that she still plays in the life of you and your siblings.
Yes. My mother is very astute financially, more so than I am. And she helped my father with his finances because he spent very readily. And so he would turn all the money over to her, and he would just relax as she just kept tab of the accounts. And she looked at all of our expenses, and I like to spend, and my brothers like to spend. And so she took all these matters in hand. She went to the College of the Bahamas, and she got a master's degree in business administration.
Okay.
And so she did quite well at that. She was also artistically inclined to an extent. She liked architecture, and the house that we lived in for quite some time on JFK Drive, she was responsible for designing the architectural plans
Lovely
of that
homes,
particular
lovely.
house. Yes.
Now, your father, many people do not know that your father was a musician also, and very, very much interested in the arts and culture.
Yes.
Tell us about that aspect of his life.
My earliest memory of him was on the Fort Hill, trying to put together a saxophone in the presence of one of my uncles. And I don't think I ever remember him playing the saxophone in those early days. I must have been about 3 or 4 years old. But I have distinct memories of him playing the piano. And my mother told me that he taught himself to play the piano after he married her. And I remember him playing Lis Leave It Strong.
Okay.
And I just marveled at the evenness and the technical control that he had, even though he learned it in a matter of months. And I also remember him playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, which he liked a lot. And my critique of that was he played 1 or 2 sections a little too fast. He could have played it slower. But he had that passion for music. And he said to me, Francis, classical music is an integral part of the culture of the Bahamas. And he always called me down to play when somebody came to the house, and I resented that so much because I had to play impromptu so many times. He also traveled a lot, and during his travels he would take me along. He traveled to Freeport, so I went along with him, and I played a mini concert in Freeport. He traveled to Michigan for a large gathering, and I was called upon to play Chopin's Revolutionary Etude.
Okay.
I was 14 years old.
So that is how you got into music.
Yes.
So
yes.
who was your piano teacher?
Gloria Lockhart was my first piano teacher.
Barrett and then Lockhart. Yes.
Yes, that's the way it was.
Very good.
And it happened that my mother decided to take up piano lessons too. She studied previously with Meta Davis Cumberbatch. And
who was Gloria's mother.
That's right.
Yes.
And later on she studied with Clement Bethel. And she saw that I had a passion for classical music, and she was getting older. Mind you, she played quite well. I remember her playing Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C sharp minor, and I think she would have done quite well if she persisted. But she saw the passion I had for classical music, and she said, "Francis, you take my place." So I went there and I studied under Clement Bethel, and
That's
it was a
wonderful.
blessing. Yes.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having seen you playing the piano on ZNS
Yes.
Some years ago. I don't know if they still play those pieces, but tell us what motivates you and what goes through your mind when you're playing or when you're preparing to play.
Yes. Well, I heard the great pianist Arthur Rubinstein say, when you play publicly, make sure that you live with your repertoire. And a lot of the pieces that I've played over ZNS, I knew them a long time ago. Since primary school, because my father was always buying us records, and I was constantly listening to records. And then he used to travel to Miami and used to travel to New York, and he bought me the sheet music. So after hearing the music on the records, I would try and play it from the sheet music. Mm-hmm. And so it's not something that I do, with 1 week's preparation or 2 weeks preparation. I've actually lived with the repertoire, yes. And I learn it so that it becomes very, very secure. And when I get up there, I won't have the problem of adrenaline and nerves, you see. And I try to get my pieces memorized in my fingers, kinesthetic memory, yes. That's very important, muscular memory. And then I analyze it. I analyze the chordal progressions and so forth. So I rely on muscular memory, kinesthetic memory, that is, and then the analytical memory and a bit of visual memory thrown in. So that when I get before the cameras, I don't think about anything. It just flows.
We're going to take a break now, Francis. It's really wonderful hearing about your father's influence on you and your love of music. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now. This episode is brought to you by the Private Trust Corporation Limited, Dungalik Studios, and Easy Light Native Charcoal.
This is the Bahamas. 700 islands, reefs, and keys, sporting a distinct history and heritage all its own. This is New Providence, most populated, industrialized island at the center of the archipelago. Home of Nassau, the capital city, seat of Parliament, location of political and social revolution, site from which our nation declared its independence. And this is Over the Hill, a community, a series of neighborhoods in what was then considered Southwest New Providence. Settled by slaves, having served as the midwife of national deliverance. Over the Hill, a breeding ground of nation builders, constructing trait by trait, precept upon precept, character-toting, culture-shaping leaders. Over the Hill, where independence was born, where the naval string of Bahamianization is buried, where Junkanoo got polished. Over the Hill, where sense and sensitivity were kneaded into the dough of children's souls, where people reverently genuflected to the image of God in every man. Over the Hill. East Street, Market Street, Blue Hill Road, Baintown, Grantstown, Anderson Street, Augusta Street, DeFort Hill, McPherson Street, Over the Hill, McCullough Corner, Hay Street, Glinton Square, where? Mason's Addition, Jail Alley, Lewis Street, Over the Hill. The Coakleys, the Smiths, the Johnsons, the Blydens, the DeStoops, the Grants and the Coopers, the McPhersons and the Pindlings, the Allens and the Winders, over the hill, the Hannahs, the Bostricks, the Burnsides, the Bethels, the Walkers, the Enuses, and the Thompsons, the McCartneys and the Gibsons, over the hill. What if we went back and dug into the soil of our glorious past? And what if we studied the roots and found the patterns of Bahamian unity and success and progress, and superimposed those on the social ills of Lil Nassau, the social ills of the Bahamas in general? What would happen? What would happen if we really understood where we came from? Our heritage is not ghetto. Our language is not profanity. Our resolution is not violence. We are Bahamians, kings and queens, gentlemen and ladies, athletes and warriors in every sphere, geniuses and priests, artists and leaders, and much of it started over the hill.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now.
Welcome back. Our guest today is musician and theologian Francis Fawkes. Before the break, Francis, we were talking about your love of music. Can we elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. My father was very, very interested in my progress, and he was always telling me, Francis, you should write a book. So the book that I thought of was The Art of Playing the Piano, because I wanted to transmit my skills and my knowledge of technique to others. And I think it was a very, very good idea because it sold quite well until I began to serialize it in the newspapers. He took an interest in the writing of the book, and he would critique the book too. And he said, you know, you write very, very well, and I can understand it. You know, it's so simple and straightforward.
That's
and
wonderful.
You explain complex concepts quite well. And so I finished the book, and I decided that I would publicize it, unfortunately, after his demise. And I dedicated the book to him, because he urged me to write it. He also took an interest in my skill. And one day he took me to see Lois Kinsino, and she heard me play Chopin.
She was very good.
Yeah, she was quite good. Mm-hmm. And she said, Francis, you know, you can enhance your technique. So she gave me a book called Hannah, the Virtuoso Pianist. And I regret that because every morning he would wake me up 6 o'clock
to practice
the series of Hanan exercises, single notes, double thirds, double octaves, double fourths, all 60 some exercises.
Every day.
You know, just about every day, you know, and it paid off quite well. And I just want to tell those that are watching and that are thinking of pursuing the piano or thinking of becoming an instrumentalist, it is vitally necessary, especially if you're becoming a performer, to develop your technique. Have a systematic way of practicing and developing technique.
Yes.
Because it would also enhance your musicality.
It never leaves you.
It never really leaves you once you have a firm grasp of it. So in that way, he played a great role in my development as a musician. And since 1987, I've played frequently. I've given many live performances, a lot of them with the police band, and he was always there to hear them.
Encourage.
And one of his favorite composers was Liszt. And Liszt was flamboyant and dazzling, and Liszt, you take a great technical ability to play the music of Liszt, and he also loved Chopin. I think his passion for classical music was almost the equivalent of mine.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
You know, I think it's so wonderful that we can show the public the other side of Sir Randol. What do you remember about, what do you think is his legacy with regard to majority rule?
In 1967, I was 14 years old, and I remember coming home from St. Augustine's College, and he told me to come upstairs and park my bike in one of the rooms.
It's interesting that you rode your bike from St. Augustine's College
to the House of Labour.
Yes.
And he told me to come out and meet the man who was going to be the next Prime Minister for the country. And so I shook Sir Lyndon Pindling's hands. And he said, we're going in we're going to have a conference to deliberate on what we're going to do with that single vote. I remember that very distinctly. And I asked him what he would do about it, because there was a deadlock between two parties. The United Bahamian Party presented him with an open check. And I said, well, what about that open check? He said, all I have to do is to sign the amount of money. But at the age of 14, I said, well, if you did that, wouldn't you go down as a traitor in history? That's the way I thought at that particular time. So he went in and deliberated, and he decided that he would throw that single vote the way of the PLP, and that is our first coalition government. And he got a ministry, the Ministry of Labour and Commerce, with copyright in his portfolio.
If your father were alive today, how would he comment on the conditions that exist in the country today?
I think he would be elated at certain things that have happened since the Burma Road riots that he witnessed in 1942. He would be happy to see a lot of people being qualified with certificates, diplomas, and degrees, and occupying high positions in the country. In his day, there were very few lawyers, and he was one of the few lawyers. You could count them on one hand.
Yes.
But today, you have virtually hundreds of lawyers in the profession. When he was a student at Government High, they were not teaching science in the high schools. So he agitated that science be taught in Government High. So he introduced that, and you have a lot of people going into the technical professions, like engineering, and you have a lot of science teachers. But he was the one that agitated that science be taught in the schools, and this has opened up many, many opportunities, educational opportunities for people all around. I think he would also be displeased with the level of crime, because he never really anticipated it. He thought that things would get better and better, but I think people were stung by the bug of materialism, and things turned out a little differently than he anticipated.
And in that regard, what would you think about the state of labor in the country today? I was very, very happy when we finally got the Sir Randol Fawkes Labor Day parade in 2013. But generally speaking, what do you think would be his opinion of what's happening in labor today in the country?
Well, he formed the labor movement with the intention of bringing together the certain craft movements so that they would have greater bargaining power. And I think he would like them to come together and take a stand of solidarity so that they would have a greater impact.
What do you see as the main difference between the Bahamas, say, when you were growing up and now?
I think we've made great strides educationally. but the spiritual and the moral aspects of things need to be taken into consideration. When I was growing up, we could sleep with the doors unlocked and the windows unlocked, and we took it for granted, and nothing happened. Then I remember my parents saying that we had to buy locks for the doors and the windows. And later on, we put bars in our houses. And I think that it's like a community that's under siege. And I think that and at the time I remember him being very displeased with the state of the country and the rampant crime and the drug problems and so forth. So he didn't really like that at that particular time.
And talking about the crime situation, mm-hmm. we have many challenges. Mm-hmm. What do you think needs to be done now to improve things in our nation?
I think the people are preoccupied with materialism. They need to think more of the forgotten commandment, and that commandment is, be ye holy as I am holy. Lots of ministers of the gospel have thrown that out of the window. And when I say holiness, I think of the Hebrew word kodesh, which means separate and apart. And that means that you're separate in thought, word, and in deed. A lot of the problems in this particular society stem from the fact of the inner condition of the people in the country. If they would examine their internal state and try and rectify that, I think that there would be a greater improvement in society. You can legislate as much as you want, but the laws only make you sin conscious. One has to be regenerated from within. And when we are regenerated from within, a lot of these external problems that we find in society would not be taking place.
So how do we go about that regeneration?
I think we need to talk more about it. That's the forgotten commandment, but it's extremely important. It's pivotal to the way we live. I think the emphasis is put on external action. What are you doing today? What are you going to do tomorrow? Without examining your thought process. Mm-hmm. I think once the leaders, and even the spiritual leaders, start to expound more on holiness and regeneration from within, that we will see a difference. So the solution is really emphasize that even more, because it's forgotten, it's not emphasized, and it's thought of as being not really necessary. Money is thought of as being necessary, and as somebody said, principle can't buy bread.
Rather unfortunate statement, hey?
Yes.
Francis, what you've just said about regeneration is so very important to the moral development of our country. And it's obvious that your father, Sir Randol Fawkes, had a profound influence not only on his family, but on the entire Bahamas. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for watching The Bahamas Then and Now. We encourage you to continue watching the series, and we invite you to urge others to do the same. Thanks again, Francis.
You're welcome.